Hello and welcome to the Moonshine Jesus Show. We're glad that you have joined us today for this broadcast where we will be revisiting a show we've already looked at, The Last of Us, but now we're coming back. We did it the first time after 2 episodes. We're coming back after the season to relook at it, even look at a few of our projections, of our predictions of what may or might not happen, and see how we felt on that. But first of all, I want to remind you that the Moonshine Jesus Show is sponsored by ProgressiveChristianity.org. We encourage you to go over there and check out all of the resources. We also encourage you to follow the Moonshine Jesus Show on our Facebook page, as well as all the places you get your podcast. I want to welcome my buddy Caleb to the show. How are you doing, Caleb?
I'm great, Mark. I can't wait to dive back into The Last of Us.
This should be fun to revisit. And we'll remind everybody right here that we're going to have a lot of fun. And part of the way we have a lot of fun is by going into a lot of spoilers. So just know that is going to happen. If you want a spoiler-free episode, this is not your episode. Matter of fact, none of our episodes are your spoiler-free ones. Spoilers are what we do. So, Caleb, we always have our themed drink. I am curious, what did you go with for this round of The Last of Us?
So I was inspired by the 7th episode where Ellie and Riley go out on a night adventure and they wind up in a mall together, spending what ends up being their last night together. And before they make it to the mall, they find a guy who has died and he has a bottle of whiskey there.
Yes.
And they drink right out of the bottle. And so in that spirit, I have just a bourbon neat today that I'm drinking.
Very nice.
Not out of the bottle; it's in a glass.
Not out of the bottle, but still, you got to be civilized to some degree. We're not surrounded by clickers right now, so you can be a little civilized.
That's right. We're not in a post-apocalyptic world yet. So I'm still going to use a glass. How about you, Mark? What are you drinking?
Well, I am actually going with a drink called a clicker. It is a smoky whiskey. I'm going with Johnny Walker, and I've made a mushroom infused simple syrup that I'm putting in.
Mushroom infused simple
syrup. Savory cocktails are kind of hot right now, so this is sort of a savory cocktail. And so I'm mixing the two of those together and putting a little bitters on top of it, and it's called a clicker. So cheers to you, sir.
Mark, I am impressed by that.
It's different, but that's kind of tasty, man. I can do that again. So anyway, let's have a few sips of these drinks, take a quick break, come back on the other side, and talk about season 1 of The Last of Us.
Moonshine Jesus. Moonshine Jesus. Moonshine Jesus. Moonshine Jesus, won't you shine a light?
Welcome back to the Moonshine Jesus Show, where today we are talking about The Last of Us. As Mark mentioned earlier, it is our second go-round talking about The Last of Us, but we are at the end of the season now, so we'll geek out about the show for a little bit, and then later in the show, we'll talk about the theology and politics of the show. So if you're not familiar with The Last of Us, it's an American post-apocalyptic drama HBO TV series based on the 2013 video game of the same name. This version is set in 2023, 20 years after a pandemic caused a mass fungal infection, hence the mushrooms in drink. It causes its hosts to transform into zombie-like creatures and to collapse society. The series follows Joel, expertly played by Pedro Pascal, a smuggler who's tasked with escorting an immune teenager, Ellie, across a post-apocalyptic United States. So, Mark, as you mentioned, last time we were together talking about this show, predictions, and this is a major one, Mark. You said that you thought that this infection was likely spread through flour. And I've got to give you a kudos, Mark, because the episode that was released that night confirmed your theory to be true. Yeah. So
I felt pretty vindicated when they said it. I literally like yelled outright, "I knew it!" I got a little too excited about it, quite frankly. I didn't need to get quite that excited. But you actually made a prediction that came true as well. When we were talking about it, I said, "What do you think is going to happen?" And you basically said, "I think that he's going to be smuggling her for pretty much the whole season, and that when they get to the doctors, that their attempt to use her blood is going to fail." And ultimately, that is kind of what happens here. Is they do get to the doctors, and ultimately they're not able to use her blood. So it wasn't too bad of a prediction there either. We both little bit of soothsaying going on there, I believe.
Yeah, I feel like we should applaud ourselves, pat ourselves on the back. That doesn't
did
always
okay.
happen,
No, it frequently doesn't happen.
It frequently doesn't, but this time we're
Right.
going to. And I think, Mark,
Yes.
one of the reasons that is because there were good writers. See, I think
I
what
completely
really
agree.
happens is we come up with the stories that they should really tell. If they listen to us, the quality of some of these programs would be so much better. But here's the thing: The Last of Us has great writing, and I think that's one of the things that really sets it apart. How do you feel about the writing?
No, absolutely. I completely agree. I mean, that's kind of the only reason I figured that it was in the flower was because the writing was so good. They kept making this point early on of not letting certain characters eat anything that had flour in it, whether it was a cake or a cookie or a biscuit. And so it's just smart writing. And I love how complicated. We mentioned last time, this is the kind of show that you could just sit back and kind of look as a kind of apocalyptic show and just let it happen. But the writing is so smart and complicated about how we let fear motivate us in negative ways, how we let love motivate us in negative ways. And they do it in such complex approaches and build these characters that are all flawed, but sometimes flawed for all the right reasons or in understandable reasons. I just think they have done an absolutely amazing job.
Yeah, the characters were incredibly compelling. They were so well written and very well developed. And so I think watching the series and seeing the character development and growth was really cool. Even characters who didn't end up being all that important for the overall story that we still got to learn quite a bit about and got to be invested in and care about. I'm thinking particularly episode 3, where we get to see Bill and Frank's characters very, very much developed. So with that in mind, Mark, did you have a favorite episode? Did any of them stand out the most?
I think you need to qualify, like favorite just overall or favorite for what it does to the show.
Okay, how about this? Okay, I want to know your favorite overall, and then I want to know your favorite in terms of character development. Where you think they did the best character work? For me, I think it's the same, but I want to see what yours is.
My favorite episode, hands down, I think it's one of the best episodes of television ever, is episode 3. The Frank and Bill story. I genuinely believe it is one of the best told hours of television ever. It was incredible.
Fantastic.
But the reality is you can remove that and you don't lose a lot to the overall story outside of how did they end up getting a truck. I mean, that's about all the advancement of the story that happens there is that Joel and Ellie get a truck. But it's also, again, another good example of great writing because we needed, after those first 2 episodes, we needed a space to breathe. We needed to see that in this apocalyptic times that something beautiful could happen. It's unusual as the way it gets played out. We needed that. So that would be my favorite one for that. In terms of character development, there's just so many great episodes. There is the one you mentioned earlier where they're in the mall. And I think we learn so much about Ellie and we see her develop and we see some flashbacks in that really help us understand who she is. But even the last episode, as we watch the 2 develop and we see Ellie kind of, that one's hard for me to answer. How about you? I'm really curious which one you think is the best in character development.
Yeah, so I think the episode where they're in the mall, episode 7, I
Mhm.
think overall I really liked that episode for the story, and I liked it in terms of understanding who Ellie was
Right.
and what kind of some of her history had been, and who she was. So it was fun, I think, to compare this with the show we watched last week. So last week we talked about Gotham Knights, right? And it
Yep.
was teenagers kind of trying to do stuff like teenagers, and it was a lot of drama,
Right.
and it was very poorly written.
Oh
And
gosh.
and so as I was watching this, because I went through and binged the second half of the season
Yeah.
over the course of the weekend, and so the other one was fresh in my mind. And I'm like, this is how you write teen characters. This is how
Absolutely.
you do it. Like just people being authentic.
Yeah.
Them like being authentically kids, exploring who they are,
Yeah.
exploring sexuality, all of the things that like
And they
they were coming into their own to be. I love to
yeah.
see that. It was cool,
And
and
they
it was
did
in the
such a
mall, man.
and they
That was
do
cool.
such a great job of this balance between where they are as kids. Like as you talked about with the type with Gotham Knights, they try to have these high schoolers act like adults and
Mhm,
the drama from. And I love the way that they handle the teens in this, where they are still very much teen, fascinated by silly, goofy pun books, but also fascinated by adult things like the things that might make you feel, or at least you're told will make you feel more like an
yep,
adult, whether it's the
mhm,
alcohol that they drink
yep,
or Ellie's fascination with guns. They do this
mhm,
beautiful kind of walking the line that we all walk at some point, where we're still kids at heart, but we're also looking into our adulthood and trying to figure out
mhm.
who am I going to be as an adult. They just do a beautiful job at communicating that, and I agree. That episode in particular, we see all of that play out.
And we get to see them kind of struggle with the social structures that they have. Like,
Yeah.
is should they go into Fedra,
Hmm.
who are kind of regulating the societies, the cities, or
Very much
should they become
authoritarianism.
right? Yeah, authoritarianism, or should they go and be rebels
Right.
or
The
freedom
Fireflies.
fighters? The Fireflies, right?
Yeah.
And so navigating the political context, I think, was very
Hmm.
interesting to see as
Yeah.
well, and how much force is justified. So one of the things that I thought was kind of unique about the show, and that they did such a good job of, is evident in both of the episodes that we just have named, Mark,
Hmm.
episode 3 and episode 7, the one that focuses on Frank and Bill, and the one that
Yep.
focuses on Ellie and Riley, is that
Yep.
we see these kind of LGBTQ characters develop. And one of the things that stood out for me, and I'm interested to see how you felt about this, Mark, is that it didn't feel forced in the way that it feels forced, I think, in a lot of shows. And
Yeah.
I think this is also a credit to both the writing and the acting here,
Absolutely.
is that there felt like a genuine natural chemistry that developed, where you feel invested in the
Mhm.
health of the characters and the happiness of the characters in a way that I don't think we feel sometimes
Right.
in the relationships on TV. How would you feel about that
I
representation?
completely agree. It's in both cases. I love that they just made it normal. It wasn't like, hey, look at us. We're now a show that's showing a LGBTQIA plus relationship. Like,
Mhm,
applaud us. It was just here are two characters who are at a place in life where they come together because of their affection for each other, because of their circumstances, and it feels so natural, and not forced and beautiful. Just absolutely in both
mhm,
cases, um, there is tension, but there is also this kind of beautiful finding something special in the midst of chaos that happens. I loved how they handled it. It's rare that you see that in
yeah.
shows, and I massively applaud that approach for sure.
Yeah, yeah, 100% agree. And so, Mark, I feel like I've got to ask you a question.
Mm.
Okay, this I think is a question that fans of the video game have wondered
Ah,
since the release of the video game, and I think
yeah,
it's something that people who were new to the series wonder about after
yeah.
watching the series. And this is a major spoiler, so just another caveat. I've got to know, Mark, did Joel make the right choice in saving Ellie, over the possibility of saving humanity at
Well,
the end of the last episode. Was that the
you
right choice or the wrong choice? I've said people
well,
are divided on this.
they are, and this was actually one of the things I was thinking about talking about in our next segment. But that's fine. We'll go ahead and explore this a little bit. It is your kind of mode of operandi that you like to take questions that I was going to ask at some point and go ahead and move them
I try to
into
ask them. I like
yeah,
to try and
you did a
anticipate
great
those and
job.
ask
You
them
did a
ahead of
great
time.
job.
Yeah.
And the part I don't like about this was that I was wanting to get you to answer that, and now all of a sudden I'm the one that's needing
That's
to
right.
respond to it. You know what? I actually no, he didn't make the right choice. A matter of fact, I'm beginning to not like Joel. I'm really
Mhm.
beginning to not like him. He is a very violent man who makes irrational decisions based on emotions, both negative and positive. He made a choice for the all of humanity out of his love, which I can appreciate and identify with. But he also made a choice that probably, for what we've seen, Ellie may not have made herself. So I really, I think it once again talks about how great the writing and the acting is. The fact that I still want to watch him as a character. I want Joel, but
Uh-huh.
if I really sit down and analyze, I really don't like Joel. I simply
Mm,
don't.
yeah.
How about you? What was your thought in response to
I was really
whether it,
torn on this because on the one hand, I can certainly understand, I
I
think
get the
in the course
emotional
of the
call?
yeah, emotionally. Although I think it comes from a very unhealthy emotional
Oh,
place
absolutely.
because whenever Ellie saves his life, he has a kind of a change of heart towards her. I think we see it kind of slowly over the course
Hmm.
of the season, but I think we especially see it there. But he as much as said that she is taking the place of his daughter. And I think that's coming from a very emotionally
Right.
unhealthy place that he
Completely.
never processed the death of his daughter. And so he's trying to fill that void with another person. So I think that that's problematic. I think it's problematic that he makes the decision for all of the human race. But I also think that we have no clear indication on whether that actually would have worked or not. So I think where I land on this is he should have let Ellie make the decision,
Yeah.
and I think he should have insisted that she know what was going to happen and that she make the decision herself. And I think you're right, Mark. I think the decision she likely would have made was to sacrifice herself for all of humanity. So, man, I'd love to talk about just that question for a while longer. But seeing as how I stole it, I'm going to let you go to some other questions that you might have, Mark. Let's end this segment where we geek out about this. Let's take a quick break, take another few sips of our drink, and come back to our Theo Politico segment.
Hello, welcome back to the Moonshine Jesus Show, and welcome to our Theo Politico segment. So I'm not going to let you off the hook that easy, Caleb. First, I want to call out to Craig, who is watching live with us, who I think puts this very well. He said, Joel struck me as a kind of anti-hero with whom I do not sympathize, but could empathize. And I think that's incredibly well put. It's kind of where I am, except I feel a little bit more strongly about not sympathizing with him. I actually kind of dislike him.
Yeah.
But I can empathize with some of what he's doing, and that's what I wanted to go back and visit a little bit with you.
Yeah.
Is you touched on it, but I'd like to hear you expand just a little bit on. Do you think Joel had the right to make a decision for all of humanity? And let's expand that to: are there ever people who should have the right to make a decision for that large of a group, particularly when it comes to life and death?
Yeah, so I don't think he had the right choose that. I also don't think the Fireflies had the right to choose that.
Right.
Actually, I think that it was a decision that Ellie should have made because it was about her own life. And at the end of the day, there's no guarantee that any of it's going to be successful. I mean, we're talking about some random doctor and some nurses in a rundown old hospital.
Mhm.
The fact that it's going to actually succeed, I think, is actually probably pretty minimal. But I mean, maybe it would. Who knows? But I think it should be Ellie's choice, and I think ultimately she likely would have made the right choice, and would probably have sacrificed herself for humanity, which I would think,
Yeah.
good of the many outweigh the good of the one. So of course that's easy
Right.
to say whenever you're watching a
Well,
TV
that's
show.
right. Well, and we talked about it the first time. It's kind of how I was going to get into this on our first episode. You asked me the question. You said you quoted Spock to me. The good of the many outweighs
I
the needs
know.
of the
See,
few.
I'm consistent.
Which was fantastic. Fantastic. You were talking about the bombing of
Uh-huh.
the cities and the choices that someone made, and it turns out that didn't work. So maybe that's
Yep.
an early writing hint that this wouldn't have worked.
Mhm.
I don't know. We'll see. So let's dig in just a little bit deeper on this, because basically
Yeah.
he makes the decision. I would say that it was a decision that wasn't well thought through. It was in a very emotional response.
Mhm. Yeah.
How often do you think, in general, we all make emotional responses, decisions based on emotional responses, and rather than facts? How frequently are we kind of as humans wired to do that? And then I'd also be curious to hear, because there has to be a balance at some point, or you hope for a balance. I'm curious of what you think that balance looks like between making decisions out of emotions and making decisions out of data, facts, information that we truly have in front of us.
Yeah, so let me backtrack just a little bit to
Yeah.
answer the last part of your last question too,
Mhm.
about whether or not anyone should ever have the
Yeah.
ability
Yeah.
in society. And I mean, I think that's one of the things that we try to do in a democracy, right? We try to elect leaders who discuss things and don't have unilateral power. I Obviously we've seen examples of how that doesn't seem to work. I mean, we just had someone in office who did all kinds of crazy things and had almost unchecked power.
I loved
So
it. I loved it when we had a democracy. It was really
yeah,
wonderful.
do you remember that? Do you remember
I
what that
do.
was
Those were
like?
the good old days. Well, it wasn't a full democracy, but at least we were leaning towards it.
So yeah, I think it's problematic when one person is given the power to make decisions for all of humanity. Which,
Hmm.
let's be honest, I mean, someone who is the leader of the United States has a lot
All
of
but doing
power
it.
that affect a lot of people. And
Yeah,
I think we can also make arguments about like IMF, leaders of IMF, the World Bank,
absolutely.
and all these things who have the ability to make financial decisions that impact people all over the world. So
Yeah.
in terms of like how we typically make decisions. So, we know that like people make decisions differently based on like personality profiles and all that.
Hmm.
And some people try to make decisions based on what they perceive as being more rational. Whether they actually are more
Right.
rational or not is a whole other
Absolutely.
discussion. And some people make decisions based on how they feel. But I think when we're talking about humanity as a whole, I think we all kind of make decisions based on how we feel. And even when we're saying that we're making logical decisions, that
Hmm.
there's no way that emotions
Right. It
aren't
can't be
tied into that.
100%. There's no way.
It
We're
can't
not.
be, right?
Yeah.
We're not
Humans.
Spock after all,
Humans
Mark,
don't process. I try. I really know.
I
I
know.
still have goals, man. I still have goals.
We're,
I will continue to pursue.
you got to purge all emotions.
Yeah.
But look, I think striking the balance comes with being aware of how we're making decisions. Obviously,
Hmm.
we can't always do that, but sometimes stepping back and looking at how we made a decision and saying, you know what, I thought I was making a logical decision here, but really, really, I was responding out of anger
Right.
or out of fear or something like that. And having some training in recognizing emotions as we have them and being able to name them, I think is important. I think that's easier for some people than others. It took a lot of work for me actually
Yeah.
to say like, oh, actually I'm feeling kind of angry, and that influenced the way I interacted with that person.
Mhm.
They didn't do anything to deserve me to biting their heads off. And that was me. That was all me. That was all my own stuff. And so I think it involves doing some work, man, and
Mhm.
recognizing how we're processing things.
Yeah.
How about you? What's your
No,
insight into how we achieve a balance?
I completely agree. I mean, I think if you actually care about folks and how your life impacts other people, that you
Hmm.
process every time you have an interaction, every time that you make a decision, particularly if the outcome was something different than what you were hoping for, assuming that your
Hmm.
outcomes that you're hoping for are positive outcomes and you have negative outcomes. Hopefully we all will learn out of our caring for other people to analyze ourselves and say, where did my decision come from? Looking back on it, I recognize there was a better choice. So why did I make that bad choice? And I think a lot of times we can point to that reacted a lot more out of our emotions. And I think that the more frequently we're doing that, the closer and closer we get to being able to process that in the moment and almost like step back from ourselves just the tiniest bit and recognize how much of what we're doing is processing through our emotions and not through a more reasonable, sound kind of cognitive approach to it. I'm not saying that that's where we want to go. Our emotions are very real and they're very
Yeah.
important. And
Right.
anytime we're interacting with someone, that is about a relationship. And relationships are much more about emotions than about facts. And so we have to learn how to process them in a way that shows that we care about people. And that's where I think the balance comes. It's like, it is the way that I'm going to be able to show a person how much I care and that I want the best for them. Is it to process out of emotions? Because sometimes that is the best way to show them. Or is it to
Mhm.
put my emotions in a little bit of check,
Yeah.
realize they're there and don't deny them, but also then move on to more fact-based information that might make this a better outcome in how I interact with the person.
Hmm. That's really interesting. And as you were talking about that, Mark, I was thinking about how we kind of not only approach people like that, but we also approach religion like that a lot of times
Absolutely, we
as
do.
well. And there are
Mhm,
those of us who approach religion more intellectually
mhm.
and more thinking through things, and that's the way we experience kind of Christianity as a helpful thing. And then there are those of us who kind of relate to religion more emotionally and think about theology more emotionally and what we desire from religion, the kind of answers
Yeah,
that we want, that we find comforting. And just as you were talking, it
yeah.
struck me that there are
I'm
a
good.
couple of different approaches to
Yeah.
religion as
I'm
well.
glad you went that way because it leads me right into my next question. In our first episode,
Mm.
the first show where we
Mhm.
covered the first two episodes, you asked the question about the religious neighbors next door,
Yep.
uh, who you were asking me, do I think that the writers were making a statement about religion in general? And I kind of thought probably not, but then you basically made some great arguments and convinced me that maybe they really were trying to make some statements about it. And now I very much agree with you. Now that we've been introduced to the religious cannibal cult,
Uh-huh.
uh, uh, what do you think at this point? Now that we've seen an entire episode where we have this religious cult that is cannibalistic and has other really horrific issues going on, particularly
Right.
with their leader. What do
Mhm.
you think? What point do you think that the writers are trying to make about religion? And I have a suspicion maybe it's related to what we were just talking,
Yeah,
at least
so
for a degree.
so that episode I think was a fascinating episode for a
Yeah,
lot of reasons. The one is people were trying to make sense of kind of this post-apocalyptic world and using Revelation to try and do that, which I thought was fascinating
yeah,
because we hear people talk about the apocalypse using Revelation a lot, not really understanding the socio-historical context, obviously, of Revelation. And so I thought it was interesting to see people using religion to kind of make sense of that. I also thought it was an interesting episode as we saw kind of, I think, Ellie and Joel kind of form the emotional bond that we were talking about earlier. But I think the
mhm,
statement that it's trying to make about religion is that religion, while it can be used for a multitude of things, including
Sure.
making sense of the world. It is most often used to manipulate people into
Yes.
benefiting the people who are in leadership. And it's kind of hard to argue with that, Mark, because I think
Yeah.
a lot of times the way that we see religion used
Mm.
is to bully people and to get them to conform to what other people want them to do. And so I think that we're seeing here a commentary on how that is used kind of in this world where people are desperate for some kind of hope.
Yeah.
And so what do you think?
No, I agree completely. I think another like piece of that is that I think clearly in both, when we're talking about the neighbors who were quoting, what was the quote about the nails in I can't remember what that quote was, but it was this really kind of something that's been said to them that they just memorize and just spit out and don't really think about what it means. And I think when you look at the particular leader of this cult, one of the things to make a commentary on is how dangerous mindless religion is. When we get a religion that's all caught up in emotion, religious has to be emotional. I mean, that's part of what this is all about. But I think that in a kind of backwards way, they're encouraging folks to avoid that kind of religion, which is all about emotional and not being thoughtful and not being evaluative and not taking, really asking the questions. And in a lot of ways, they're always making an argument that if you're going to do religion, make sure you're doing a religion that does find that balance that we were just talking about between the emotional and kind of between the logical and being able to approach it that way. So I feel like that's part of what they were doing. We, of course, aren't ever really going to know if that's what they were doing, but I think you and I both have experiences of bad religious experiences that were all caught up in emotion and are currently in situations where we have positive experiences of religion because we're in places that value both the emotional and the logical elements that can come along and help guide us in who we're supposed to be, how we're supposed to relate to this thing that we call God, and how that should impact the way we relate to the world and the people around us.
Yeah, I think that's a very helpful distinction, Mark. That I think the scene I'm thinking about in the show is the one where the teenager's father has died, and he's quoting from Revelation about how God will wipe every tear from their eyes, and so she doesn't need to worry. She needs to put her faith in Him, and in religion. And I think that is exactly the kind of manipulative religion that we so often see. And I think I 100% agree with you, Mark, that one of the things that we're trying to do as a progressive Christian movement is to say, hey, look, you don't, sometimes life's just going to suck, and there's not an easy answer to get out of this. And, but I think the good theology along with that is, not that God's going to come and wipe every tear from your eyes, but that God's present in the midst of that community that's around you, that you're not alone. And I think that that's one of the reasons that I've experienced good theology and had a good church experience is because of seeing God in the midst of community.
Yeah, I love that answer, and I think it's the perfect place to wrap up this segment. So we're going to take a drop real quick, have a couple of sips, and come back to our favorite segment, the Make Me Look Stupid segment of the show.
Woo! Welcome back to the final segment of the Moonshine Jesus Show, the Make Me Look Stupid segment. To maybe make our co-host look stupid, or we just try to have some fun asking some questions. So thank you all for sticking around to this last part of the show. And Mark, here's what I'm thinking about today. I'm reflecting on how good we were at making predictions about the show, and I believe the show has been renewed and is coming back.
It has. Matter of fact, I am right. I know it's been renewed for the next season. I feel like I read that maybe even they've already said there will be a third season as well.
Okay, so here's my question, Mark.
Yeah.
What's going to happen next? What are we
Oh.
going to see in season 2 of The Last of Us? And then we can come back and listen to this as you have done for our first show, and we'll see how you did predicting.
Well, the thing is, I've got to decide which of my two questions I want to ask you the most, because my answer is going to give away one of my questions. So I'm buying time like you do. Like when you go, that's a very good question, Mark. I'm buying a little time so I can make my choice here. All right. So I think what's going to happen. We're going to see a mini episodes of Ellie. I believe is already suspicious that Joel is lying to her about what happened at the Firefly Hospital. I think that there will be a moment where he either has to admit it or she finds something out, and it's going to yet again wreck their relationship. And I think we're going to have to see that get redeveloped. Smart writing, because that's part of what made the first season happen, was there was tension between them, and then they slowly would chip away at that tension to come back together. I'm not going to name names here, but I do believe that by the end of the season, we will lose a major character.
Okay. One of the major characters will be gone by the end of season 2.
I believe so. What about you? What would your prediction be?
So I think you're absolutely right that Ellie is going to discover that Joel lied to her, because obviously she wouldn't have asked what really happened if she didn't suspect that something else had happened.
And she went back and asked him, "You promised you told me the truth?"
Right.
And he said, "Absolutely." And
he had to double down on that lie. Right.
And she paused and went, "Okay." But you can kind of tell there was this little.
Yeah, she did. So I think you're right about the tension there. I think they're going to find another doctor, or Ellie's going to seek out another doctor, looking for a way to make a cure. I think she's going to take the lead on looking for that person. And I think either at some point in the season or some point at the end of the season, she will find a doctor who will go through and try to make a cure from her development. That's what I think.
I like it. Okay, so my question for you is pretty straightforward. Both of my questions were going to be pretty straightforward. I'm just curious because I am invested in this show. I really like it. Trying to figure out where it's going, what's going to happen. And this is part of one of my predictions, but I didn't want to give the question away yet. So my question to you is, do you think that the Fireflies will come after Joel and ultimately Ellie and get revenge for him killing everyone in the hospital? Do you think that that's going to be part of next season, of them pursuing him? And if so, what do you think will happen?
Yeah, so that's interesting, because I don't know if there's any. Yes, I think they will, because I think they'll find out that some group will go there and will discover that Marlene and the other Fireflies are dead. And they know enough about Joel to know that he has a brother who's in Wyoming. And I think they'll come to Wyoming trying to find him. I think that'll destabilize the commune that they have there, which, by the way, was another one of my favorite lines. You all are communists. No, we're not. Yes, we are. We literally live in a commune.
Live in a commune.
Which I thought was just a great line.
It was a great line. I completely agree.
Yeah, I think they're going to. I think it'll destabilize that commune. I think it will further drive wedge between Joel and his brother. And I think it'll set them off. I think maybe that'll be the catalyst to set them on the run with Joel and Ellie again. How about you? What do you think?
No, I think you're right. Although there is part of me that wonders if there's enough Fireflies left to actually engage any kind of assault on that city that seems to be relatively well fortified.
Yeah.
Because I just blanked on her name that he killed. Marlene.
Marlene.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Marlene mentioned that she was just barely able to get to the hospital because there were so few of her comrades that
Right.
were left to be able to get there. And then Joel goes about killing every one of them in the
Everybody.
hospital.
Yep.
And there is a part of me that says, are there even enough Fireflies left based on those two pieces of information
Yeah.
to stage an assault of any sort in a kind of confined and somewhat well fortified city, so to speak.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know. Although I do think that they're going to need something, like you said, as a catalyst to make Joel and Ellie leave, because it's not going to be very interesting for many episodes to have them living in peace in the middle of the commune, and they're going to need a reason to get out. Maybe that's going to be that Ellie figures it out and sneaks out at night and goes to look for a doctor on her own, and Joel has to go after her. I don't know. But I think that'll be one of the interesting things to see for sure.
I think so too. And, one of the interesting things we do find out about the Fireflies is that there are other locations. Like I think Riley was going to go to Atlanta. And so maybe
Yeah.
they've
Maybe they network.
radioed ahead or something.
Right? Could be.
Who
Who knows? It could easily be. Yeah.
Hidden Fireflies. Okay. Man, that was fun. I'm glad that we got to talk about The Last of Us twice because I loved this show.
I do too, man. I really do. It's so much fun. I love, and one of my favorite things that they don't beat you over the head with, but is always present, is that throughout the show, we see that the real monsters are humans.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that there's that subtle kind of, yeah. The fungus monsters, they're scary. But you know what's really scary? People.
Yeah. And it's hard to argue with them there. So we'll have to come back, Mark, next season and revisit The Last of Us, see if our predictions have come true. But before then, we've got to think about next week.
This is true.
Mark, it's kind of a dry spell here again with releases.
Yeah.
And you had an interesting idea about what we could do next week. You want to share?
Yeah, absolutely. I think just in general, we're still in a period where there's going to be some weeks where there's just nothing new that's worth talking about. I mean, there's a few new things, but they're not worth talking about. And so I think it'd be really fun to go back and look at some classic sci-fi fantasy movies that we've not talked about because they are, classics from the past. And my all-time favorite, it might be my all-time favorite movie, it probably is Back to the Future.
Oh, yes.
Are you a fan?
I'm a huge fan. Yes.
All right. So I think that would be so much fun.
Mark, I've got to tell you, this movie is so important to me because it came out the year I was born.
Oh God, why did you have to say that, man? It came out the summer of my junior year in high school. So, ouch. But okay, fine. That's fair. It's still fair. It's fair. Okay. It's still, but it actually speaks to what a great movie it is. It came out the year you were born. It came out in my formative years of high school, and we both love the movie. How often does a movie that's like over a 15-year span impact two different people so strongly that they're like, this is a great movie, it's one of my favorites. I think this would be great. It'll be fun to cover, man.
Okay, I can't wait. Okay, so if you haven't watched Back to the Future in a while, make sure that you check it out again.
Just the first one.
Binge the trilogy. Oh, I was going to say binge the trilogy.
Oh, I don't know. Do we want
We're not going to talk about the trilogy.
No.
I mean, but just
why not? It's fun. The second two aren't the amazing movie that the first one aren't, but they are fun, and you get to keep being involved with the characters, which is a lot of fun as well. Okay, I'm with you. I'm going to binge all three as well.
Binge all three, and if you can find the episodes of the cartoon,
no, do not do that.
Too.
Please do not do that. Well, I like our listeners too much to encourage them to go watch.
Subject them to that.
No, please don't do that.
At least try and watch the first one, and if not, I bet you'll remember it enough. So, can't wait to see you next time on the Moonshine Jesus Show. See you next time, folks.
Moonshine Jesus, nobody